Let's jump right into a scenario that honestly sounds like it was ripped straight from a Hollywood disaster movie script, but I promise you this is entirely real. Picture this. It's 1978. One of New York City's tallest, newest, and most celebrated skyscrapers is quietly standing literally one bad storm away from toppling right over into the dense, crowded streets. And the craziest part of this whole thing? We, the public, didn't even find out about it for almost 20 years. Today in this explainer, we're going to unpack the absolute ticking clock mystery of the Citicorp Center crisis. It's a wild story about a brilliant design, a fatal, tiny flaw, and a desperately shrinking window of time. So put yourself in September 1978. Deep inside the dim, echoing structural columns of this massive high-rise, welders are frantically working through the night. Imagine amber sparks flying everywhere against the dark skeleton of the building. And they are doing all of this in absolute secrecy. Why? Because right out in the Atlantic Ocean, a real hurricane is forming, and it is curving its way straight toward the New York coastline. And the terrifying reality is, the building's own structural engineer just ran the numbers and realized a storm exactly like the one brewing could bring the whole entire tower down. And yet, almost nobody knows. Outside a tiny, super hushed circle of engineers and corporate executives, nobody knows a single thing. The sheer scale of this secrecy is just mind-blowing. I mean, the seasons changed, years passed, and the thousands of people walking through those doors every single day had literally no idea how close they came to an absolute catastrophe, and they wouldn't find out for nearly 2 decades. But to really grasp how a modern architectural marvel ended up in such a terrifying and secretive spot, we gotta rewind a bit to when it was first built. Let's flash back to 1977. The gleaming 59-story Citicorp Center has just opened in Midtown Manhattan. The structural engineer on the project, a guy named William LeMessurier, faced this massive headache during design. How on earth do you build a giant skyscraper when there's a historic church sitting right on the corner of your lot and they absolutely refuse to move? Well, his solution was completely unprecedented. Instead of putting the support columns at the 4 corners like, a normal skyscraper, LeMessurier placed 4 massive columns right at the center of each side. This effectively raised the entire tower 9 stories up into the air on stilts, so it was literally hovering right over the church below. It was an absolute stroke of genius. But, as you can probably guess, building a massive skyscraper on stilts comes with one major headache: the wind. To keep this unique, stilt-based building from swaying dangerously high up in the sky, LeMessurier used this brilliant piece of technology called a tuned mass damper. Think of it like a giant counterweight. He designed a massive 400-ton block of concrete, set it on hydraulic systems right near the top of the tower, and its whole job was to absorb and counteract the building's swaying motion. Architects all over the world were blown away, celebrating this as one of the most innovative structures ever built. But here is where things go wrong. During construction, a seemingly minor choice was made that almost doomed the whole project. To save a bit of time and money, the construction team decided the building's huge diagonal steel joints, those big chevron-shaped braces holding the whole thing together, they were going to be bolted together instead of welded, which is what LeMessurier originally wanted. Now, on paper at the time, bolted joints seemed totally fine. Nobody flagged it as an issue. Nobody bothered to recalculate the stress on those specific bolted joints for every possible wind condition. It was just a quiet, unchecked box on a blueprint. But it effectively planted a time bomb right in the heart of the tower. And the spark that set off this entire crisis? A single, completely innocent phone call. Fast forward to June 1978. An undergraduate architecture student at Princeton is researching the Citicorp building for her thesis. She picks up a phone, calls LeMessurier's office, and asks a very simple question. What happens to this building in quartering winds? Basically, what happens when the wind hits the building diagonally, right on its corners instead of straight on its flat face? Well, LeMessurier gives her a confident, textbook answer and hangs up. But as he sits alone in his office looking out at the skyline, that question just starts gnawing at him. He just can't shake it, so he sits down under his desk lamp and decides to run the numbers himself. And keep in mind, it's 1978. He's not using a supercomputer. He's doing these incredibly complex structural calculations by hand on a yellow legal pad. And what he figures out is straight up chilling. His manual calculations prove that diagonal winds, those quartering winds the student was asking about, actually put an incredible 40% more stress on the building's corner joints than a straight-on wind ever could. Now, here is the real kicker. What happens when you combine that new math with the cost-saving construction change we talked about? Remember, the joints were bolted, not welded. When LeMessurier combines that 40% stress increase from the diagonal winds with the inherent weakness of those bolted joints, he is staring at a terrifying number. Those joints could face over 150% more load than they were actually built to handle. And when he checks the historical weather almanacs, he realizes the odds of a storm strong enough to produce those exact winds hitting New York in any given year were uncomfortably high. So now we are looking at an absolutely crushing moral dilemma. LeMessurier is sitting all alone in his dark office, staring at the math that literally proves his masterpiece could kill thousands of people. He has a choice, right? He can stay completely silent, roll the dice, and just pray a major storm never hits New York City. Or he can come forward, admit this massive critical flaw, and face total professional ruin. It would bankrupt his firm and destroy his reputation forever. It's the ultimate real-world test of engineering ethics. Well, LeMessurier chooses to come forward. He picks up the phone and makes the absolute hardest calls of his life. First, he confesses to his insurers. Then, he actually presents his findings to Citicorp's top executives in this incredibly tense, dimly lit boardroom. His message is crystal clear. The building has a fatal flaw, and it is deadly serious. Together, this small group makes a monumental decision. They're going to fix the building immediately, but they have to do it in absolute secrecy to stop mass panic from spreading through the whole city. Because of this, the Citicorp Center takes on this completely surreal double life. By day, the skyscraper's lobby and plaza were just bustling. You had office workers, shoppers, tourists, thousands of people walking through a building that could literally collapse under the right gust of wind. And they're just grabbing their morning coffee, going about their ordinary routines, totally oblivious to the enormous danger looming right above their heads. But by night, the building transformed into a frantic industrial triage zone. The very second the daytime tenants went home, these highly specialized welding crews were quietly sneaked in. They tore open the interior drywall to expose the massive structural columns, and they just started reinforcing joint after joint with heavy steel plates. Sparks are raining down inside the walls all night long. It was an absolutely desperate race against the clock. And by morning, the drywall is patched, the floors are swept spotless, and the daytime workers roll in with zero clue about what happened while they were asleep. The pacing of this whole thing is just heart-pounding. Think about the timeline. In June, the student asks the fatal question. By August, the secret nighttime welding operation is in full swing. But then, in early September, the literal worst-case scenario happens. A real, intensifying hurricane forms in the Atlantic Ocean, and its projected track shows it curving directly toward the New York coastline. And those secret repairs? Yeah, they are only halfway done. As you can imagine, this triggers an instant bureaucratic panic behind closed doors. City emergency officials are quietly brought in. Planners are frantically drafting evacuation routes, not just for the skyscraper, but for the entire multi-block radius around it. But the most critical move they make, it involves that 400-ton tuned mass damper we talked about earlier. If the building loses power during the hurricane, that damper stops working, and the tower becomes infinitely more vulnerable to those diagonal winds. So engineers are racing to install a massive backup generator to guarantee that damper keeps running, even if the entire city's power grid goes down. The tension in those government offices and corporate boardrooms must have been absolutely suffocating. I mean, down to the wire. But then, just days before the storm is supposed to make landfall and test this crippled building, the hurricane changes course. It weakens. It turns away from the coast and heads harmlessly out into the open ocean. Can you imagine the relief? The tension just instantly releases. The city, entirely unaware, is completely spared. The storm turning away bought them the exact window of time they so desperately needed. By October, the secret repairs are finally finished. All 200 of those critical steel joints were successfully reinforced with welded plates. And the crazy thing is, the building wasn't just fixed. It ended up stronger than originally planned. It was now fully fortified to withstand a monumental weather event, like a storm you'd only expect to see once every 700 years. Ultimately, William LeMessurier's honesty and picking up that phone likely saved thousands of lives, even if admitting his mistake almost cost him everything. But honestly, the most mind-blowing part of this whole explainer? The fact that this massive, city-threatening crisis, the secret night welders, the drafted evacuation plans, the whole shebang was kept completely under wraps for almost 20 years before the story finally leaked out. It leaves us with a pretty profound question to chew on. If you were in LeMessurier's shoes, sitting under that desk lamp in the middle of the night, would you risk your entire career to confess a deadly mistake before anyone else found out? It's a fascinating look at structural engineering for sure, but an even deeper look at human integrity. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive into the Citicorp Center crisis. Keep asking those big questions, and I'll catch you next time.